Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you, and welcome to this May edition of the APPA Agora. I'm your host today. Of course, you mostly know me, Lou Marinoff, and I mostly know you, some of you very well indeed. It's a great pleasure to welcome our featured guest today, who's also extremely well known in the philosophical practice community and beyond, Peter Raabe. Welcome, Peter. I'm going to read your introduction very briefly, and then we'll get going. Okay, we'll have an interchange. I have some questions that I'm really keen to ask, and then we'll open the mic as we always do, and allow our participants to jump in as they normally do as well. So get ready, Peter. We're going to take you on a ride today, an interview ride with all who wish to join in. So Peter was born in 1949 and received his Ph.D. from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, for his research in philosophical counseling. I might add that I was actually fortunate to be the external examiner on that thesis. I remember it very well, Peter, and I just happened to be in Vancouver for a conference at the time of your oral exam. So I was very pleased to attend your viva voce, and you did a wonderful job with that. You were, I think, the first. Is that fair? I'm interrupting the bio, but I just want to be clear. Weren't you the first one to write a PhD on philosophical counseling?
As far as I know, in not only Canada, but I think all of North America, yeah.
Yes, quite so. There's a bit of an echo on your mic. Is it possible for you to make an adjustment of some kind? Are you just doing what you normally do on Zoom?
Yeah, I just have a what do you call it, a screen in front of me, and I have a camera above that, and I don't have an external microphone. So
right.
What you see is what you get.
What we hear is what we get too, but we can fix it a little bit in the mix. We have some back end technology when we do this being recorded, and we'll upload eventually.
Does that make me look better too?
I beg your pardon?
Will it make me look better too?
You look great. Well, I don't know what we can do about the look. We might have to Photoshop you for that, but we'll do what we can. Peter, to continue, you are Emeritus Professor of Philosophy from the University of the Fraser Valley in Abbotsford, beautiful region back in the rural area behind Vancouver. I know it well, and it's really gorgeous country. For 25 years, he taught a variety of philosophy courses, including philosophy of mind, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and reasoning. He developed and taught a specialized course in philosophy for counselors and psychotherapists, about which we certainly want to hear more later. He facilitated a public philosophy café in North Vancouver for 8 years and established 3 mental health discussion groups. Peter is the author of many peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, international conference presentations, and workshops on the theme of philosophy's role in mental health care. He's on the editorial boards of several international publications, and he is the author of 3 books: Philosophy's Role in Counseling and Psychotherapy, Issues in Philosophical Counseling, and Philosophical Counseling Theory and Practice. The Korean National Academy of Sciences selected the translation of this book as one of the outstanding books of 2011. And they distributed it to universities, public libraries, and research centers throughout the nation. It is available in complex Chinese, Italian, and Japanese translations. Peter is also co-editor of the book Women in Philosophical Counseling, I think with Luisa de Paula, if I remember correctly, and is a contributing author and editor of Philosophical Counseling and the Unconscious. He's a certified philosophical counselor and lives in North Vancouver on the Pacific coast of Canada. So welcome, Peter. It's great to see you. Please unmute and stay unmuted.
Yeah. Thanks, Lou. I really appreciate the introduction. And I just want to mention that I was very much rescued by you at one point during my defense of my PhD. I remember there was a question that came up about Freud. And I was stunned because the professor asked me, or I mentioned Freud, and the professor said, well, it's easy to criticize Freud, in a sense, trying to shut me up about Freud. And I'm sure that was the situation. That's what I remember anyway. And then you jumped in and gave a wonderful answer of some sort. And it was such a relief to me because I thought, oh, there goes my doctorate. But I felt rescued by you. I honestly did.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I am quite sure that they would have given you the doctorate anyway. It was certainly an original piece of work and well researched, well written, and well deserved. However, it was very opportune that I was able to jump in. And as external examiner, as you know, on these things, they usually accord us a little extra weight. But you didn't need me there. You would have been fine in any case.
Thank you.
So my first question, and I always ask this pretty much of our guests, is what initially drew you to philosophy in your graduate studies, and what specifically drew you to philosophical practice?
Okay, well, I think a little bit of background as to the family I came from and so on. My family was very much a fundamentalist Christian family. And the belief in that particular church was that the world was going to end very soon and education wasn't important. So I didn't pay much attention to any education for quite a while. And I got a regular job and worked at a bunch of different jobs that I was not very happy with. But I discussed this with my wife, and I was in my 30s, I think, at that point. And my wife said, well, what was the job that you've had of all the jobs you've had since high school? What was the job that you enjoyed most? And I said, well, interviewing people for radio. I had a job on radio for about 4 or 5 years. And again, short term. And she said, well, why? And I said, because I learned so much from people. When I interviewed professors from the university and people that were traveling through town that were promoting books and so on, I learned a lot. And my wife said, well, you seem like you really like learning. And of course, my background, I hated high school. I didn't work very hard in public school. And so my wife finally said, well, if you enjoy learning, why don't you take a course? And I took a course at Capilano College. Just to get just to try it out. And Mark Battersby was my philosophy professor, and I had no idea what philosophy was at that point, but I decided maybe it's close to something I could use given my theological so-called background, religious background. And my experience with my religion was that you don't ask questions in a certain area, in a certain context. There are wrong questions that can get you into trouble. And of course, I was the kind of guy that was asking wrong questions, and I was told I had a bad attitude. This was in the church, right? In Mark Battersby's class, we were all told that any question is okay as long as it's respectful. No such thing as a stupid question, stupid answer sometimes, but it was a very open environment. And I was so amazed. And of course, we talked a little bit about the topic of religion, which comes into a critical thinking. It was a critical thinking class. And it really opened up my eyes. And at that point, when halfway through the course, I was so excited, and I said to my wife, I got to take some more courses. And of course, I loaded up on all the philosophy courses that are available. And then I went through university. My wife supported me all the way through. And I got to the point where I graduated from Cap College, and Susan Gardner asked me if I had time during the summertime at one point to teach some critical thinking to a group of men in a recovering center. They were recovering from alcoholism and drug abuse. And I said, well, what do I do? And she said, well, just do the kind of stuff you do in a critical thinking class. So I went there. For the whole summer, there was a group of 40 men, and I taught them how to think critically. But during the process, there were individuals that would come to me after they got to know me and after they got to understand and appreciate the process that we were going through, discussions and no stupid questions, that kind of thing. And I had a few of them every once in a while would approach me and say, I've got a problem. Can I talk to you about it? Not in front of the group, but maybe privately. And so I asked the people who ran the center, I said, is there a room available I could maybe, borrow occasionally after the group discussions? And they said, sure. So they put me in a room. Or they gave me, access to a room, and these men would come to me with issues, life issues, sometimes relationship issues, sometimes addictive issues.
Sorry, Peter, your mic just went off. Could you open it again? Yeah.
I don't know what happened. I bumped some kind of button here. So the men would come to me with all sorts of different issues, and we would talk privately. And then when I went back to school, I started university in the fall. And one of the students that I'd gotten to know through Cap College, she said to me, so what have you been doing this summer? And I said, well, I've been doing critical thinking with a group of men in a recovery center. And she said, oh, really? Like, what kind of things do you do? And so I explained a little bit. And she said, well, that's like philosophical counseling. And I said, what is that? I never heard of it. And she said, well, there was just a conference here at UBC. Lou Marinoff was there. Have you ever heard of him? And I said, well, I think so. And she said, well, that's what you're doing is philosophical counseling. And why don't you look into it? So I did. And it took me a while to sort of, find information. And there wasn't anybody to talk to specifically. There was nobody around. I think you'd left at that point already. And so I researched philosophical counseling, and I went through my master's and wrote a thesis on Locke and religious toleration, which really fit, where I'd come from. And eventually, when it came time to decide on that topic for a Ph.D., it was suggested to me, why don't you write something on what you had done during the summer and philosophical counseling and so on. So I did. I wrote the book on philosophical counseling theories and practice. And I didn't write the book. I wrote my thesis, and I submitted it to a publisher, and they published it. They accepted it right away. So that's my history. And then eventually I was looking around for places to teach. I taught a little bit at UBC, and then I expanded to other colleges and so on. And there was an offer, a job offer came available out in Abbotsford. That's a long way from where I live, but the opportunity was just too great. They wanted someone who started as an associate professor, or I forget what's lower than that. I'm not sure. But I applied, and there happened to be people out there who knew me from UBC that had shifted to teaching out there, and I told them what my specialty was, which was philosophical counseling, and I published a book. And they hired me on the spot, and it was a tremendous trip. And I have to mention, when I graduated from Cap College, I said to my wife, "Well, that's it. I've done it all. Here I am. This is it. This is all you get." And she said, "Well, why don't you go on and do your PhD? You can't get a job with just a college degree, And so I did the MA. And then I said to her, "Okay, well, look, I've done the MA now, and this is it. I'm done with academics." And ready to retire almost. And I said to her, this is all I can do. And she said, well, you got to get your PhD. You're not ready to retire yet. You can get work teaching or whatever. She said, well, you've got to go for your PhD. And I said, well, I'm 50 years old at that point. I'm sorry. Was it 50 or 40? No, I can't remember. Anyway, I think it was 50. And she said to me, you're going to be 50 anyway. And I thought, wow, that's very profound, very philosophical. And so this is when I decided to sign up and go to UBC. Now, don't quote me on the 50. It might have been 40. I'm getting all the years mixed up. There's so much going on in my life that wasn't, just straight linear. But what it allows me to do is to really empathize with people who are in their 30s and 40s and saying, life is over. That's it. I give up. I've had jobs that I hated, and it's over for me. And I tell them a story about myself. I've told the story quite often. And it's helped a lot of the clients that I've had to actually say, okay, well, I'll give it another shot, and choose a direction that was more appealing to them than what everybody suggested they should be doing, kind of thing. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's quite a story. And, we found over the years that mature students often make better students than immature ones. It's sometimes a very good idea to take some time off. I took a decade off. It was almost too much, but back late. And late bloomers can sometimes do good things, Peter. I think, we're both evidence of that, and others in the audience might be as well. But I think that's a great story. And I didn't know that you were at Cap College. I adjuncted at Cap College, probably just before you arrived, or maybe simultaneously, and didn't encounter you there. But at the time, Yolanda Westwell Roper was the chair. Did you know her?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So we were there around the same time. She's a fantastic philosopher, and she was a great friend. And I taught a number of courses. And probably you knew John Dixon as well then.
Yes, I took several courses from him, yeah.
Well, what a fantastic philosopher. And for the benefit, again, of our audience, John Dixon was a friend of Kim Campbell, who was a justice minister under the former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. And when he resigned, there was a scandal as usual in politics. That's, de rigueur. So when Mulroney resigned, Kim Campbell became the caretaker Prime Minister of Canada, as I'm sure you recall. And she brought John Dickson to Ottawa as one of her senior advisors. So you had this philosophy professor from the hinterland up in Capilano, North Van, and he became a senior advisor to Canada's Prime Minister. So I think that's another great inspirational story about where philosophy can lead, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, that's really fantastic that I never knew until now that we had those roots in common. And were you born in Vancouver? Are you born and raised there, or did you move from some other place?
Well, I was actually born in Germany, and I came to Canada with my family when I was 7 or 8 years old, I guess. And I grew up in Ontario. And that's where my father, he was transferred from Germany to a factory in Ontario. So I'm actually, I don't know Germany very well. I've been there for several conferences. We have relatives over there. But I tell everybody that I meet when they want to speak German with me, I say, well, my German's equivalent to about a 2.5 or 3-year-old. So.
Well, it's not an easy language anyway for us non-German speakers, but I think it's great that you had this trajectory and found your way into philosophical counseling by being unafraid to ask questions, even in environments which were not necessarily receptive. But they really threw you into the lion's den, Peter. I mean, you were immediately working with substance abuse people, and there was no formal training or credentialing. It just said go do critical thinking with them. Is it more or less like that?
Absolutely. It was just like that. Yeah. And the funny thing is, though, Lou, I wasn't really what's the word, terrified or paralyzed by having to deal with people who had those kind of problems, because my thinking had already shifted toward addiction is not about the drug, it's not about the alcohol, it's about the problem in people's lives. And when my friend said to me, well, you're doing philosophical counseling, and she explained what it was, using philosophy to help people, I thought, that's totally logical. That's absolutely logical. That's why I did it, because it made sense. And she said, well, now it's all codified, or it's beginning to be anyway. So I wasn't terribly intimidated by having to deal. Now, mind you, some of the guys were intimidating, but I didn't let that fool me, because they were testing me quite often. They would challenge me, and I remember one gentleman who came up to me and he said, well, why do you do this? So I told him why. And then he said, well, why do you do that? And then I told him why. And he said, well, why? And he asked about 10 why questions. And I patiently answered each single one until he finally gave up. But the thing was, the other guys that were standing around and watching what was going on, they were amazed that you can answer every single why question. There's no reason why not, except impatience, right? So I was quite at home with these gentlemen and with the topics they were bringing up to discuss. They were very, very interested in what I had to say. No question about it.
So for the benefit of those who maybe are not familiar with your 3 or 4 or 5 books, at least the main books that that we've announced, who are your favorite philosophers? Who inspired you? John Locke, you mentioned early on, but who else have been your inspirational figures in the history of philosophy?
Well, I think Lou Marinoff stands at the very top somewhere. You're asking a very difficult question. And I'm very eclectic. I don't have a favorite. I love reading Nietzsche because he just stirs things up, and he takes no guff from anybody. That's my impression of him anyway. I like Locke very much because of the very logical structure of his arguments. I learned how to write argumentative papers clearly, at least I think I do, write clearly, from Locke's writings. And of course, we had to study Plato, some of which I found very difficult. And one of my instructors said, well, it depends on which translation you read. And then I thought, oh my gosh. So there can be problems in how you interpret a philosopher because of the translation that you're getting from somebody else. And through the years, I've realized that translations make a huge difference. I have trouble with people who translate from German when my understanding of German words is very different from the way the philosophy is translated and so on. So anyway, I'm getting off topic here. As far as real favorites, I really don't know. I read Nietzsche before I ever took a philosophy course. I remember that. I was a cowhand on a ranch for a little while, and the local library had a system where they would ship books to you in a box by mail, and you sent a slip back for the next bunch of books that you want, and it was like a library, on call. And some of the first books I read were Nietzsche, and they just blew me away because he was dealing with kind of issues I could understand, and I could read the German. The translations I had were Kaufman, and he was really good. I hate to admit it, but I really liked Nietzsche. I thought he had a lot of good things to say, although he was, misogynistic and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I've got to hand it to you. You were a cowboy reading Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche would have approved somehow of seeing himself being read in the saddle. I think he would have liked that.
Yep, I absolutely agree. I don't think he would have faulted me for that. Yep.
And I also agree about Kaufman. I think his translations are iconic. And I see our younger students are always sort of transported by Nietzsche just because he is so rebellious at times, and I think that he appeals to the adolescent or late adolescent spirit. And for some of us who never grew up, we still love him for that reason. He's also a prophet, as you well know, not only of postmodernism and other things, but quite an amazing figure. Not that always that useful in counseling, however. Have you had any specific cases where you actually used Nietzsche?
Oh boy. I think the herd mentality is it's my go-to often, where people have problems because if they live their lives according to the way you're supposed to. And that immediately rings a bell in my head about herd mentality. And so I think that was really useful for me to have read that about, in Nietzsche, the writing about how, you've got to be your own person. Existentialism, sure. Nietzsche's supposed to be the first existentialist or one of the early ones. But the whole thing about going along with people for whatever reason can be so disastrous, and I use myself as an example. Although I was raised in a church, I didn't have much choice for quite a while, but I made the decision. And Nietzsche really, I think, to a certain extent, he and other people gave me the strength to actually to diverge from that herd mentality that I've been raised in. And I think that's one of the big things about Nietzsche that was really, really useful in counseling to me.
Interesting. And you conducted a café philo for about 8 years. Where was that, in North Van, or where was your café?
North Van and Deep Cove. I don't know if you're familiar with Deep Cove.
Sure. I've been to
very,
Deep Cove.
Very pretty place. Yeah. I started there. It was just a matter of difficulty of finding a place that would allow, people in that were not specifically there to buy stuff. So I started there, and then I moved to downtown North Vancouver in a restaurant, again, that was very, very accommodating and a really nice place. They had a little, one area of the restaurant was actually raised with a bit of a railing around it. And it was just, this was our space every once a month. And it was interesting because while I was still in Deep Cove, before I actually came to the North Vancouver location, I was contacted by Joseph Yosk. Is that his name? Yeah, from Simon Fraser University. And he said, we've got this program going with philosophy cafes. What are you doing out there? And I said, well, that's exactly what I'm doing. He said, did you know about our program? I said, no. He said, well, I didn't know about you either. He said, what about we team up? And I said, what's in it for me? Because our cafe is doing really well, And he said, well, we put you in our brochure and we give you permission to charge an entry fee, which we never did. And so that it really blossomed from there, because then we had advertising, and we had people standing in the back, like just standing room only. Usually we had about 40, maybe 35, 40 chairs. And then we'd have, at least a couple of dozen people standing and behind on some of the cafes. That we just, depending on the topic, of course. And it was just, and the weather. It was a wonderful experience because it was a teaching experience for me, in the sense that we discussed topics that were interested and relevant to people, And I think taught the participants how to participate without arguing, without coming at each other, and without poo-pooing each other, and so on. And the respectful dialogue really attracted a lot of people to our cafe compared to perhaps other cafes. I'm not sure, but it was a very, very popular cafe. And the interesting thing was too, at one point, there were young people. There were quite a number of young people. I'd say about half a dozen or so. Early college students, late high school students that would come on a regular basis, sometimes with their parents or their dad or mom. And I asked one of the young women, are there a lot of young people out there that would, I think my question was, what do you find interesting? And she said, well, the topics that you guys talk about are the kind of topics we never talk about at home very much, right? And so I said, well, here's an idea. Why don't we start a teen cafe? And she said, okay, let's try that. So she told all her friends and relatives and what have you, and we opened a teen cafe on an alternate whatever days of the month. And when I got there, there was only the first time there was only 3 or 4. And we tried it a second time, and there was 3 or 4 or 5. And that was it. And I said to this young woman, what's going on? And she said, I'm not sure. I'll talk to some of them and let you know. I thought there'd be tons of young people coming here. So she went, talked to some of these young people that she'd invited, and they said, well, when we sit around with you young guys, all of us teenagers together, we just hear the same old stuff that we always get. She said, and they said, so she came back to me and reported what they said. And she said, what they said in a nutshell was that they enjoy being with the adults because they get to hear what the adults have to think about the world and about teenagers and what have you. The kind of stuff that you don't normally talk about with parents, except how's school and what's for supper. So the teen cafe didn't really get off the ground very well, but the other cafe it was incredible. I did, I think, 8 years of it or something. And it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And then, of course, what happened then was my teaching load increased, and I'm driving back and forth to Abbotsford, which is like an hour and a half drive each way. And it got a bit much. So I thought, well, I'm going to cancel the cafe and concentrate on teaching. And I was writing a lot at that point, too. But that's the story of the cafe.
Sure. I totally share that experience. I did one in Manhattan for about 7 years at a bookstore, and it was a parallel experience. We'd have 40 or 50 people every month, and I would let the group choose the topic. So I wouldn't impose a topic on them. Always had stuff they wanted to discuss. And as what you said really resonates, because they ended up talking about things that they couldn't talk about at work. They couldn't talk about at home. They couldn't talk about on the campuses of their colleges or universities, some of them, and still can't. Taboo subjects on a university campus. Can you imagine? So I learned a lot from the public about the demand for philosophy that was really being unmet. And you must have had that same experience based on your recollections.
Absolutely. My approach was to have a clipboard with a blank sheet of paper, and for people to list their ideas for topics to discuss. And then new ideas were put on the bottom each time we met, and we would just pick the topics as we went down. The only condition was I would never change a topic except to make it philosophical. So it wasn't an empirical question or a yes or no question kind of thing, right? But yeah, the participants really liked that aspect of it, the fact that, I can pick a topic that I would like to discuss, and they're all going to talk about it with me, and they're going to help me think about it. It was just great. I love doing it that way, because I started off in the beginning suggesting topics, and it's like, I've been through these so many times. But the perspective that the individual, the layman people would put on it was amazingly instructive for me as well.
Sure. Nowadays, it's become also a branch of what, as you know, they call this public philosophy, because enough people have been doing enough cafe philos and radio broadcasts and podcasts and things. So the public is much more involved, and it really needs to be, I think, off campus as well as on. So I'm very happy you did that. It certainly enriched my practice. I didn't get clients from the cafe. It's different constituencies, right? The people who a group like this want to have a discussion and listen and participate. People who come for counseling are a different population normally. That's been your experience as well?
Yes, absolutely. The issues that we talked about were issues. They weren't personal problems. Although sometimes people, could identify with the issues, the topics we talked about, but they were not the kind of personal problems that you get in a counseling situation. You're absolutely right.
Sure. I remember the funniest one ever was there was one evening where I don't even remember what we were discussing, but it was such an animated discussion it was a whole section of this Barnes and Noble where they usually have the book presentation.
Yeah.
So we were having such an animated discussion that some of the customers who were shopping for books complained to the manager that it was too loud, and the manager loved us because we brought people into the bookstore, and people come in, they're going to buy a coffee at the Starbucks, they're going to buy a book eventually, they won't leave empty-handed, but it was a really I think uplifting experience to have a complaint that the philosophy group was too engaged and was disturbing the peace in a sense of the other shoppers.
Yeah.
The people who were freeloading, sitting and reading for free in the armchairs, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure you had the experience too, where people went and bought a coffee and maybe a piece of cake, and then they listened and they heard some stuff, and they came wandering over and took a seat in our group.
Yeah. Yes, definitely, they would do that, and I think it's a great example, to set that to just to remind people that philosophy is not something that's solely in the ivory tower or needs to be locked up in the ivory tower. So
Absolutely.
I commend you for doing that. And I think that one has to have a certain temperament to do it. You're very even-handed, and you're a tolerant person, and you know how to manage a group. So those skills are definitely required.
True.
So what about the counseling practice? Do you want to tell us about some memorable cases? Do you have any interesting cases you'd like to?
Oh, wow, they're all interesting. I've written several books with lots of cases in them. I felt that when I wrote the books that the cases were really important to offer insights to what I was talking about instead of just writing theoretical books. I don't know. There are so many. The second book that I wrote, the Issues in Philosophical Counseling, was actually a book that I used in my course at UFV because it had so many issues and then case studies for each issue in the book. And I actually wrote it as a sort of an instructional book. But outstanding cases, wow. The one that comes to mind immediately every time, because it's so terrible, was the story about the man who killed his 5 children. And I used this story to illustrate how problematic psychology, psychoanalysis, psychiatry, how problematic it can be when that's what you're relying on to tell you what the person's state of mind is. And it was a story about a man whose wife ran off to her mother because he was being abusive, and he left the kids at home with him, 5 kids sleeping with him, and he ended up strangling all the 5 or 6 young children, and then setting the house on fire, and killed them all, of course, and burned the house down. And then he jumped in his truck, and he drove to where his wife was staying with her mother, and he picked her up. I don't know how he convinced her to get into the truck with him, but he picked her up and drove her back to the house that was burning and said, "There you go. You wanted to be alone. Well, now you're alone." And then I guess then he let her go. And then, of course, and he surrendered to the police because I guess the mom or somebody, I'm short forming the whole story, phoned the police, of course, and they picked him up, and he never denied that he did what he did. And I think he must have, here I am theorizing, I think he must have figured that if he admitted to the crime, then the judge or jury, whatever, I think it was just a judge trial, would think, well, anybody who does that, they've got to be mentally ill. There's got to be something wrong in their mind, right? Or their brain. So he never denied that he did it. And the judge said, well, this is such a complicated case psychologically or psychiatrically that he called in, sorry, hang on. First of all, he had a defense attorney who hired a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist filled out a form that showed that this man was guilty or possessed 4 different mental illnesses. That's why he did what he did. They caused him to do what he did, which is an important point. They said they caused him to do what he did. So the prosecution attorney was smart enough. They hired their own psychiatrist who used the same forms and had the same check marks that was on the original form that the other psychiatrist took. And he interpreted those 4 check marks totally differently. And so he said, this man is not mentally ill. He's perfectly sane and capable of standing trial. So the illustration and what came to me is not a case, of course, it's not a case I dealt with. And I'm sorry, I guess I got sort of off topic, but it's such a strong story from the perspective I take when I talk about philosophical counseling is how different the psychiatrists can be on their analysis and their diagnosis of an individual. So diagnosing is a real problem in the profession itself. And of course, the guy was found guilty because he was dumb enough to he wrote a letter to his wife explaining why he did what he did. And so they said, the judge said, if he can write a letter like that, he's not mentally ill. He's clearly just evil. So that's a case that I've often used to with my clients to show them that psychiatry can be absolutely wrong, black and white, absolutely. The answers that come from examining a form that someone fills out about themselves or that a psychiatrist fills out by questioning and looking at the guy and saying, okay, here's what I think is wrong with him. So that's, like I say, it's not really a case. I've had cases of some of them that jumped to mind immediately where the answer was so simple, was a young woman who had established a store for herself. I think she was baking. I'm not sure. I can't remember what she was selling, but a very, she said it was just such a wonderful existence that she is having. But she found herself always having to deal with money issues and then some staffing issues and then trying to make ends meet and, long working hours and so on and so forth. And she said, I just wish things were different. And my question to her was, well, what did you imagine? And of course, she imagined the sort of candy store, bakery stuff that you see in cartoons and that you see on television. And I said to her, well, what do you do all day long? And she said, well, I make the confectionaries and the confections, whatever, and I work on the books to balance all the budgets, and I go to the bank and I have chats with bank managers and blah, blah, blah. And she said, I hate all that stuff. And I said, well, that's what owning a store and running a store is all about. It's not about that fantasy thing of dancing from aisle to aisle while you're holding a cake over your head, and her eyes just lit up. And she didn't realize. And I said, you're doing exactly what a good store owner does. You're taking care of the business that you've got, as opposed to the fantasy that you're trying to live. And to me, it was a very simple observation, but it hadn't occurred to her because she was so invested in a dream that she wanted to establish. So that's another one. It's fairly simple, and it only took, I think, 1 or 2 visits with her. The first one to get used to me, and the second one to actually delve into the issues.
That's a great example. I think that people's expectations often are unrealistic, and they cause themselves to suffer because of that, right? So,
right. Yeah.
And dialogue somehow can help this. People can sometimes have a revelation or an epiphany on their own, but usually it's better to talk to somebody, and specifically a philosopher in that kind of case. Back to the psychiatry for a second. Now, okay, because I want to focus on this with you a little bit. I think that we agree on some things and probably not on all, which is normal for philosophers. But you have definitely presented an overall picture, I think, which is shared. In some cases, people do agree with some of your arguments about psychiatry, specifically that they are capable of contradicting each other day in and day out. If you call expert witnesses, of course, the prosecution psychiatrists and the defense psychiatrists are going to give expert opinions that are 180 degrees out of sync. So it does definitely cast a pall of suspicion on their scientific expertise. Of course, right. No one will debate that. The other thing that is really important, I think, that you said in the context of that narrative is that one of them was asserting that the mental illnesses caused the crime, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're diagnosing symptoms, and you've written at length about this, and I think a lot of us agree with you about it too, Peter. So there's no argument there. On the other side of the line, I want to ask you this. I mean, do you think that there are some people who are legitimately mentally ill or psychiatrically ill, whether because of some brain problem or some mind problem, or do you think there's a distinction? Do you want to make one, or are you willing to concede the point that some people probably do need to be in some kind of institutional setting in order to prevent themselves from doing harm, to themselves and others?
I think there's a big difference between mind and brain. That's where I start with the course that I teach. That's the first thing we talk about is the difference between mind and brain. They're not the same thing. They're not the same stuff. The brain is like the liver, whereas the mind is not. It's non-organic. It's metaphorical. And the example I use, I think in all of my books probably, is think of a book itself. There is a book, which is the solid material object, and there are the arguments in the book. And to say that the arguments are the same thing as the book is mistaken. The book is a physical thing. It's got a shape and everything. But the beliefs and values and arguments and concepts and fears that are expressed in the book are something very different. They're immaterial. Okay. So when you talk about mental illnesses, if you talk about the mind, then mental illnesses is a what's the word? It's a wrong phrase.
Well, Thomas Zasz called it a myth. I mean, if you want to go that.
Sure. Okay. But the question is why? And I'm not sure, like I read most of his books. I'm not sure I agree with the explanation. I have my own explanation. The word illness to me suggests a physical problem of some sort. Usually, by a virus or something like that, or a malfunctioning of an organ or something like that. Whereas the mind doesn't work that way. The mind is a confusion. It's a mistaken belief. It's a faulty assumption. It's a religious tenet that has no empirical basis, and so on and so forth. That's what the mind is. Can you have assumption illnesses? Can you have value illnesses? We say, well, his values are all wrong, but that's not an illness. That's something that's going on in his thinking, his beliefs, right? Can you have a belief illness? But you can have a physical brain illness, absolutely. Once you've got some kind of like a tumor, for example, you can have a brain illness, but you haven't got a mental illness. The brain illness can affect your ability to think with your mind, to come up with ideas, to consider your beliefs and values and so on, because the brain is malfunctioning. Okay, but it's not the mind that's the illness. The mind is being hampered by a malfunctioning brain. As soon as you have a physical diagnosis, which I always ask my clients if they have any kind of physical diagnosis in their brain. And of course, all the clients I've had have always said, no, my doctors checked me and I'm okay brain-wise. There's no such thing as a mind tumor, but there certainly is a brain tumor. Okay, so if there's something discovered in the brain, then it's not a mind anything. It's not a mental anything. Okay, but if there's something discovered in a belief that's wrong, it's not based on fact, it's based on belief of some sort, then there is an issue. There's a problem, and it can really affect people's lives just as much as a brain tumor can, but it's a different thing altogether.
Sure. I mean, that's a very articulate defense of this kind of dualism, but it's also an interactive dualism, right? I mean, you don't sound like Descartes. You're not proposing these two, that mind and brain persist in totally disconnected dimensions. So you need a third agent now to cause them to be synchronized in some way. But this interaction is the mystery, isn't it? And it's a two-way street because, as you rightly said, I mean, I fully agree that a problem in the brain, if it's a physical problem, can certainly affect the way we think and behave and choose. And, I think Damasio did a beautiful job with Descartes' error, if you remember the book, to show how a brain injury can affect our ability to reason in deleterious ways. But it's also a two-way street, is it not? That how we think and how we utilize consciousness, whatever it may be, and no one knows. The hard problem remains. I think that the Eastern philosophers have done a much better job of working with consciousness in the West. But surely, I mean, I'm asking you, do you also then acknowledge the two-way street, that that how we utilize consciousness in turn affects our physical constitution.
Absolutely. And I don't pretend to be a neurologist. I can't tell you what consciousness is, except the fact that we inherit it at birth. But we don't inherit beliefs and values and fears and so on at birth. We get those taught by our parents and by our peers when we're young. So there absolutely is a connection between the mind and the brain. When you decide to do something, you decide with your mind. You think about it. You wonder if it's you value it enough to go to all the trouble to do something, and then you act. Then your behavior and your actions are based on your thinking, on your mind. Okay, the brain does not tell you what to act. The mind, or how to act. The mind tells you how to act. The brain then figures out how to motivate the body to do it so you don't fall on your face, right? So those two are definitely connected. I think Descartes was being too much of a materialist. Like I said, I don't pretend to know why it is when I think of something that it makes me move my arm. But then I don't really know exactly how, when I tell my computer to do something to a machine beside me, like print paper, for example, how that works either. It's a mystery. There's a little black box in there that tells the printer to actually print something when I push a button. And all I did was push a button, right? So there are those mysteries that we're getting closer to when it comes to artificial intelligence and so on. They still haven't figured out, but they know there's a mystery that can be figured out. And it's not necessarily in the same language. So they're inventing things like quantum, for example. It's not in a materialistic language that Descartes was using, because that's all he had in those days.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think that it's probably a good thing that it remains a mystery. It gives us a lot of work to do.
Yeah,
No.
Yeah, keeps the philosophers employed.
So tell me this, couple of more questions if you don't mind, and I'm really enjoying talking to you. We don't get a chance to do this normally when we're at conferences. We're busy doing workshops and things. We never sit down and have a cup of coffee. So this is really great. So Peter, you've been well received internationally, and as you mentioned, Korea, China, Japan. So what about your work? What do you think about your work has been so interesting for our Asian colleagues in particular? But you've also done things in Europe, and you've been all over. So what is it about your work that has been most interesting abroad?
That's a good question. What I found, after visiting a number of different countries, both in Europe and in Asia, is that in Europe, they were already on the road, so to speak, with philosophical counseling. And when I came, it affirmed what they were doing. And they felt good about the fact that, look, we're doing this already, what you're telling us about. Isn't that fantastic? And it was a real buddy-buddy kind of conferences where they invited me to speak. And what I gave them, of course, was the more psychiatric kind of perspective. I did a lot of research in psychiatry and psychoanalysis to be able to tell people the differences between philosophical counseling. So I brought that to them, and that gave them more motivation to actually believe in what they were doing. So that was the continent. That was Italy and actually Mexico as well, and Germany and a few other places. But when I went to Korea and Taiwan and what was the other place, China, they had there was a different thing going on there. When I got there, they had just discovered it. Now, they're farther along now, of course. But at the time when I went to those conferences, it was like brand new for them. And they didn't have nearly as much of an investment in the field already as we do. They were testing the waters. And so the conferences were very much like that, very rudimentary. And I said to my wife one time, going to these conferences, I don't learn a lot in the Asian countries because they're telling me stuff that we did 10 years ago, right? So very, very different, although they were extremely accepting and very, very interested. One of the real sort of awakenings that I had when I was there was I talked to, I think it was one of the young women that was my babysitter, my guide. I called her my babysitter because I didn't want to lose her because I get lost very easily in big cities. Anyway, she and I had a conversation one time where we were, I think, still in the car, and she said, No, hang on. No, we were at the conference, and they took us to a little market kind of area where there were people selling various semi-precious stones and so on, right? Pardon me. And so I walked up to one and I had a look, and there was a piece of what's it called? Oh no, I can't think of the word. There was a bug in it, and in the bug, and I said in the little piece of what's it called? Help me out, Lou. Anyway, doesn't matter. There was a little bug in it, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't buy that. I wouldn't feel right about having a bug encased in what's it called?
Amber.
Amber, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't think of the word. Yeah. And she said, oh, okay, that's fine, and so I bought something else. And then walking away, the young woman said to me, that's really interesting that you feel that way about animals. She said, we don't really feel that quite that yet, here in this part of the world. And then I said to her, well, how do you feel about psychiatry and psychology, not psychiatry, psychoanalysis and so on, compared to what I was promoting? And she said, well, it's a very rare time that a person will go to psychiatry or a psychoanalyst. And I said, why? She said, because it has a terrible stigma attached to it, that you end up being seen as an inadequate or a broken person. And I said, whoa, well, what do you do for, when you have a problem or an issue? She said, well, we go to, she said, what do you call it? Those people, they read cards and they look at tea leaves and stuff. And I said, what? I said, that's all you have to go for? It's either psychiatry or these people that would read your palm and so on. She said, yeah. And I said, well, what do you do when you go to these people? What do they offer you? And she said, well, basically they talk about our problems and they tell us, how to solve our problems. And they look at the cards and they tell you according to your birth date and the stars and so on. I said, wow, that's where you're at. She said, yeah, that's the choices we have. Is psychiatry will get you laughed out of the town. And the other is, she said, I know it's not of much value. She said, that's why we were so excited about philosophical counseling when it came here. And so she said, we want to learn everything you can share. And I said, well, I'm up for it, But it just really was a slap in my forehead, sort of, what? This is where they are in terms of professional help. And they call them professional helps, these people that do this kind of stuff.
Right.
So it was very different from Europe. Yeah.
Very different from Europe is an understatement. But, they have imported clinical psychology into Korea, and they've studied, as far as scholarship is concerned, and I know, we've had lots of experience in Asia and speaking in universities and meeting scholars there. They are great scholars of us. Not just us as philosophical practitioners. They study the analytic traditions. They study the continental traditions. They're very studious. I know Koreans who've been to Germany and studied, and had to write their PhDs in German, and they've done it and succeeded. Incredible discipline and studiousness and devotion. They're great scholars. They've learned a lot more from us in Asia than we managed to learn from them, for sure. But this much I can say, they have lost touch because of globalization and technology transfer and all the other stuff that's going on. They've lost touch, many of them, with their indigenous philosophical traditions. Yeah. So we'd help them to make that reconnection. And we were both in Korea when they launched humanities therapy back in 2012, and it's become huge. They're funded by the universities and their governments now to take philosophical counseling and to surround themselves with others from the humanities who can shed light on the human condition without necessarily medicalizing it or pathologizing it. So in China now, they're doing Taoist cognitive therapy. They've managed to replace Western cognitive therapy with indigenous Chinese philosophy. So more power to them. You see, they've learned from us, and now they're repurposing their own indigenous philosophies in order to do philosophical practice. It's a tremendous accomplishment, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think that's a wonderful way to go, to use what people are familiar with in that society, the Taoist philosophy, to actually do counseling with it, as opposed to let's try and convince people of the Western philosophy before we can help them kind of thing.
Yeah, well, they can say what we would get into trouble when we started critiquing the pathologization of the human condition back in the 90s. Of course, we took flack for this. You remember, because the media gins up controversy. That's how they make money. So they managed to enrage various psychologists and psychiatrists to make ill-advised pronouncements about what we were doing. They didn't really know, but they gin up controversy. But in East Asia, they have no problem saying we reject a lot of this because it's cultural imperialism. They call it that. We can't because we're inside the culture, but they can and did. And that's one reason why they're being supported. They have more support from their governments and universities than we do by a long shot. This, right?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I had two summers where I taught summer school that were a group of Koreans that had been sent by the Korean government to study with me in Canada. And I was actually absolutely blown away that this was funded by the university and the government to have their students, and there was like a dozen of them that came to Canada. And it was a real experience for them, of course, and it was a great experience for me. They wanted to experience the culture, I guess, as well as the philosophical counseling.
And they're so enthusiastic, aren't they?
Yeah.
How long did they spend? Like students. 2 weeks? Was it a 2-week thing or more or less? Or?
It was a 1 week, very comprehensive. 1 week I had to pare my course down to 5 days. I think it was 6 days, something like that. Yeah. And it was just all day long for 5 days. Yeah.
I'm not surprised they picked you. The Korean government also has sent 2 cohorts, one undergraduate cohort and a graduate cohort to City College to do special week-long seminars with yours truly.
Same idea,
Funded by the Korean government. That's not cheap. Peter, they're spending a lot of money on the humanities. They're flying a dozen students over and putting them up for a week. And then, it's a real investment. But the students are so thrilled to be doing it. It was a real joy to work with them. I see you had that experience as well.
Absolutely. And the work they did on paper and so on was outstanding because I didn't expect it. I have to admit I had lower expectations and they came through with flying colors, better than many of the Canadian students that I had.
Yes, speaking English as a second language and reading English as a second language. But again, they have good study habits and they're very keen. It's a wonderful thing. So we've been both, in a way, instrumental in helping the Asians to get back in touch with their own traditions.
Yeah.
So it's great to see it growing there. Okay, one more question, please, and then we're going to open the mic. What's your new book? You said you're working on a new book. Could you mind telling us a bit, or you want to preview it?
I can preview it. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I sent you an essay. That's actually one of 2 that I now have. I'm storing up. I'm working on a 3rd one. I have no title for it yet. But the overall theme is, I want to get this right, speculative philosophical counseling. And I know it sounds kind of weird, I know. But what I'm doing is trying to imagine, because of the rapid changes that our society is going through, what kind of issues would a future philosophical counselor, what kind of questions and issues would a future philosophical counselor have to deal with? And what kind of answers might we now think about that may not come to those counselors in the future who are so immersed in that culture at that point in the future. So it's a little science fiction-y, but I'm trying to be helpful. All the writing I've done, never mind counseling people personally, but all the writing I've done, I've tried to be helpful to people. And there's lots of theory out there now about philosophical counseling. As a matter of fact, I'm tired of reading theory of philosophical counseling. I am much more interested in case studies, of course, and the kind of thing that I'm want to do in my next book, which I haven't even got a title for yet. But the approach is really exciting to me about thinking about the technology that we're dealing with, that we're unleashing on the world, and how a philosophical counselor might be called on to deal with some of the problems that arise in a highly technologized, whatever the word is, future mankind.
Fantastic. I just got through teaching a philosophy of AI course, and I can't keep up with it. It's not Plato where you can have time to reflect on what you want to teach and how. But teaching philosophy of AI is like being on an accelerating treadmill. Trying to stay with the leading edge that we know about is hard enough.
Right.
To
Yeah.
mention it's only the tip of the iceberg. I think we might get replaced one day soon. So we might not have that problem, Peter. I hope we
Right.
do. But if they could train some generative AI to do philosophical counseling, they will. I hope I don't see that day, but you never know. We might have competition from that sector. What do you think?
I think I'll be writing about all the problems that people will be running into when their robot seems to be wearing down. What do you do with them? Shoot them? Bury them? You can't fire them. Do you let them loose on society to roam around and be homeless robots? All those kind of things. I am very skeptical about this paradise in the future with everyone, everybody having their own robots and being, helped hand and foot by technology. Look at the internet. All the promises. Oh, go back even one further. Look at phones, right? iPhone. Look at regular television. And the promises that were made, television being such an educational age, it's going to educate everybody. Well, what are they doing? They're pumping commercials on every channel. It's such a frustrating thing to watch television anymore. Same thing with iPhones. They're getting more and more commercials on iPhones. It's not about communication. It's about commercials. And so the same thing with robots. All the promises are going to be totally forgotten in the future. It's going to be about money making. Nobody builds a robot for free. They're not going to give them to us. Okay. So for one thing, it's going to be rich people that own them. And for another thing, it's going to be corporations that control them and what they do and what they won't do and so on. So I don't believe in that. We've been promised the what do you call it? The ideal society. We've been promised it many, many times throughout history. It's never happened. Flying cars is another example. Forget it.
You're on the record. We'll see what happens, but we're glad to have you on the record. I'm afraid that I largely agree with you about the commercialization, but there's also this power struggle going on. It's a much more serious problem when you move beyond mere monetization. So, okay, e-commerce is like trillions of dollars. We're stuck with it. People are going to do it forever, but I'm more worried about people's consciousness being hijacked by technology. That's a much more serious problem, I think.
I'm also worried about the weaponization of AI, and they're talking a lot about that right now too. Yeah. It's not the artificial intelligence that worries me; it's the people who control it.
As usual, I guess you could say, as we do. I mean, then it sounds like you're going to defend the Second Amendment, saying it's not guns that kill people, it's people who do. But let's not go there today. Peter, thank you very much for all of these insights.
It's people who build the guns that are the problem.
Yeah, but they do it for money too. We're right back to the commercial stuff, okay? And if they didn't build them, you know what? People would be making them at home. They have these zip guns they put together. You could probably get a kit from Amazon. I'll bet you Amazon will send you the parts overnight, and you could put together your own gun, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but the world we live in, right? But can you put together your own philosophy of life? No.
Good question.
Not from Amazon, right? We still each other for this. Peter, I'm going to open the mic. Abraham already put up his hand, I think. Is that right?
I just applauded it. Okay, thank you.
You applauded. It was an applause. Yes. Well,
yes, I also can ask my question.
Please do. Welcome.
Thank you, Peter. I'm really enjoyed your talk. I'm familiar with your work and your articles. And I translated, I think, 2 of them for Turkish readers. Oh. And my question is that, you said in your book, philosophical counseling, you start, contrary to the conventional beliefs, philosophy is not a solitary pursuit in which the philosopher sits and thinks in isolation from the rest of humanity and natural world. So many of philosophical counselors, they say similar things. Can you comment on this? Because still, it was, the cliche is that this philosopher just live in his ivory tower, don't follow the social media, or it is confined to confines his studies to his classroom or her classroom, or it is his or her boundary is in the campus. But as you just revealed, you said excellent things, how you and your work reached overseas, Can you a little bit elaborate about this? Thank you.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I used to believe that, and it was sort of a magical belief, I guess, this life of a philosopher, what a wonderful thing to be sitting by yourself and thinking and coming up with stuff. I was a pretty independent young man. I wasn't lonely by any means, but I was independent. I didn't have a lot of friends who thought the same way I did. We'd party together, but we didn't discuss a lot of things together. But there was one friend of mine who ended up going to university and became very well respected in psychiatry. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. But I owe a lot to him as well as several other people. And when I look back on that, again, the point is that this friend of mine, he went to university, and we would have these discussions. We'd sit in the car late at night, and we'd just discuss back and forth about life and philosophies and so on. And he took a few philosophy classes. This was when I was still undecided about belonging to a church. I was trying to get out of it, but I didn't have anybody outside the church that would support me. All my friends and relatives were in the church. But he asked me philosophical questions that I couldn't answer. And they were wonderful questions, and then he would try to answer them and so on. So he turned my life around. He was one of those people that was a lifesaver, among several others like Lou I mentioned earlier. But coming up with ideas is very, very difficult. You tend to run out after a while. And so the belief that philosophers are these independent thinkers, I keep thinking of the example of Einstein. Apparently, his wife was very influential in the theories that he came up with, not only coming up with ideas that he would then appropriate and develop, but in correcting some of the ideas or shaping them with him. And yet she never got credit for anything. I read that in a book on feminist philosophy. I was stunned when I read that because I thought, Einstein of all people is an independent thinker, an isolated thinker. So the whole thing about sitting in a and I tell my clients this too, like sitting in a cave and ruminating and philosophizing by yourself, you only get so far because then you start seeing the same old stuff again. It's like eating the same hamburger every single day. You got nothing but that hamburger. You're going to get nothing put in except that hamburger over and over and over. You run out. And so philosophical counseling is like that too, and philosophy is like that too. You go to get other people's perspective that you may not have thought about yourself. And you go from that. And you do that whether it's other people in books and magazines or if it's physically. I sometimes watch Star Trek and I got great ideas from Star Trek, right? And you might think it's funny, but I watch it very differently from the way other people watch Star Trek for the shooting and what have you. I never watch Star Wars because there's no story to it. So the individual isolated, philosopher is a myth. It's a male fabrication. It's like the American gunslinger was a myth, right? One guy who kills 15 people and saves the young damsel. It's all a myth, and it's created by men. And so I take issue with that. I don't even want to be an isolated philosopher. When I have an idea, I bounce it off people. And my wife's been very, very helpful in that regard, but other people too, and students too. And I don't hesitate to have students, when they disagree with me, great, we both win. Because if I'm wrong and they disagree with me, they correct me, I win. And they win because they've discovered something true that I had missed and so on. So there's no ego involved in developing your thinking process and developing your ideas. And if there is an ego and you think that you can do it all by yourself, you're fooling yourself because you're just going to get the same stuff. There's only so many tools and so many ideas you have in your mind. If there's no input, same output over and over.
Right. Let's blame it on Rodin's The Thinker, because that sculpture has become the kind of universal meme for what philosophers are doing. But what you said is actually closer to the truth. We never we're having dialogues smeared out over centuries with other thinkers. That's how we roll. And you're so right. Einstein's wife was a theoretical physicist, and he never did give her credit. John Stuart Mill gave Harriet Taylor credit, though, because in those days she wouldn't have been permitted to publish philosophy, but she influenced him, and he said so very clearly several times. And you gave your wife a lot of credit off the top of this broadcast. I mean, she should have joined us to take some of it in person, but you've been acknowledging that from the get-go. And dialogue is what works for us, isn't it? At the end of the day, what we're doing with our clients is dialogue, and nobody can do that alone. And it's another mystery, like consciousness. We don't know why dialogue works, but it really works. Monologue doesn't work so well. Dialogue has a great power, doesn't it?
Yeah. If nobody agrees with you, it gets boring.
So Ibrahim,
I'm sorry. I said that incorrectly. If nobody disagrees with you, it gets boring. That's what I meant to say.
Oh, sure. For sure. But philosophers don't have that problem because we disagree with each other about everything. So this is what astounds people, right?
It's fun. That's the fun part.
Yeah.
But Lou, there is another interesting point. I have a comment with Peter. I also started with teaching critical thinking course for the first time in Turkey. Then it brought me to the philosophical counseling. Because when people they began to think critically, they ask philosophical questions, as Peter said. Then I have to also teach a course, in Turkey on philosophical counseling. It's very interesting.
It's great, and you're such a pioneer, and you'll never be bored, Ibrahim, because as far as I can tell, you're relentlessly translating all of us into Turkish, and we owe you a great debt for this. It's a wonderful thing that you have absorbed so much from our side, and that you're able to render it in a way that's going to be useful. And Turkey is I think a great intellectual power in its own right, potentially, which could be awakened by practical philosophy, right?
Yeah, I have good news for you. On Thursday, 2 days ago, we have a big symposium in one of Turkish universities, and they asked me as a keynote speaker to just summarize what is philosophical counseling is and what is the current situation in the US and Canada. And I made a very good. I am amazed. So many students of philosophy departments, they attended this in person, but I joined them with Zoom, and I can see the whole hall was full of students, and there is a big interest. They just want to see, something new.
That's fantastic. But you're catalyzing this. I mean, there might be an interest, but we need to have someone who ignites the actual, fuel that's sitting there. And you're doing this. So we all owe you a great deal of thanks, Ibrahim. Thank you also from me and all of us here for carrying this work through. And we look forward to a day when we'll be able to go to Turkey and join personally, in a conference there. Istanbul. Been on my do list for a very long time, and I hope one day to get there. But thanks again for joining and for all the hard work that you do. Sarah, you've been patient. Please unmute and say hello.
Yeah, about two related questions. When I was in graduate school, I had a fellow graduate student whose brain disease affected her worldview and her beliefs. She became very attracted to a male friend of mine, and she formed the belief that she represented the divine law and he represented the human law, and the divine law and the human law had to unite. And so she tried to force her sexual attentions on him, and she ended up being committed. And my question is, what intervention would you think would be indicated with her? And the other question is, do you think philosophical intervention would be possible with someone like that?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think my approach would have, which is my first thought that came up when you're telling the story, my question would have been, what do you mean? How do you know? What do you mean by the divine law? It sounds to me like she has a perception of herself that you were skeptical about, and I'm certainly skeptical about it. If someone says to me, I'm the representation of the divine law, I think I would ask for more clarification. The first thing that you do in philosophical counseling, is to listen and to ask questions for clarification, not in terms of challenges or disbelief kind of questions, but what do you mean by such and such, and how does this work? Explain to me how this works, that you found out that you're a representation of the divine law. And sometimes by doing that, when people start to explain themselves, they start to realize the complexity of their metaphysics, of what they believe, what their belief about reality is really, how it's affecting their lives. And that perhaps what she's dealing with is something that may not be a reality at all for most people, except for herself. And then the question is, where did that come from? What is it that's working in her life that makes her believe these things that seem so fantastical? That's the starting point. And after that, you'd have to wait for the answers from her and then go from there.
I think that's a great approach, Peter. It's once again concept clarification, critical thinking, getting the client to explain what's going on in more depth so that you could ascertain their metaphysical beliefs. I think that's a great way. And you've done a lot of that in your casework. I see that continually. You're not arguing with the client. You're trying to elicit a deeper explanation of their process. Yes?
Yes. And that pardon me, then you're very dependent on how you use your voice. Talking about voice, I'm starting to lose my voice. 1 second, please. When you're asking a question of what do you mean by that, of course, everybody knows there's a big difference between saying, what do you mean by that? And, well, what do you mean by that, right? And so, believe it or not, you have to be you have to be an actor to a certain extent. You have to show that you do not mean to be attacking the person, that you don't mean to do any harm, you just want to find out. And that can it can cool down a lot of situations where the person is really, really upset by saying, I'm interested to know what you're thinking and where you're coming from. It's important for me to understand, right? Understanding someone is the greatest gift you can give them, as far as I'm concerned. So that's it's an important thing how you ask the question of what do you mean by that.
Totally agree with you, and let me add something, because we're on the same page here, Peter. Honestly, to use that expression, I believe that there are not only active wills in the human. This old debate about what's primal. What is primal in the human being? Is it the will to pleasure, a la Freud, the will to power, a la Hobbes or Nietzsche? I think there's something else, will to meaning. Is very important. But also, I believe that there's a will to be understood. It's a passive will, not an active will. It's a will to be understood. And a lot of people don't feel understood. And this becomes a source of problems for them. And they seek someone, somehow, who can at least attempt to understand them. And then they feel like they have a place in the world. Does that make sense to you?
It absolutely does. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of our problems right now in the world is the fact that everything is in such a hurry. I mean, again, going back to television, which I know a lot of young people don't watch anymore, but the ads are extremely short, and the cuts in the ad are like 3 seconds long. You cannot absorb, you cannot think about what's going on. And I know that even discussions on television, like when I have a panel or something, the talk is so fast and people cut each other off. We don't give people the time to explain themselves. We don't take the time to understand people. And that's part of our coffee society that stops at Starbucks before we have any conversation. And then we're so wired we can't listen and we can't talk slow enough.
Yeah, we live in a instantaneous, disposable culture. I remember one time the Lifetime Women's Network, Lifetime TV. They had a really well-intentioned documentary on philosophical counseling. They said it was a snippet out of their hour-long show. They said, we're going to take an in-depth look. In television, in-depth was 7 minutes.
Right.
this is in depth for them. I mean,
Yeah.
excuse me, if Patricia's laughing, others, if philosophers do something in depth, it could take us 30 years, and not get to the bottom. And they're doing in depth in 7 minutes. It shows you how shallow the mentality is that they actually inculcate. It's a very scary thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Regina, you had your hand up. Would you like to go for it, please?
Oh, well, he answered it. I was interested in his methodology in some way, and he answered it through what he did with Sarah.
Yeah, through Sarah's question, yes.
But I will add that you mentioned something about the philosophy of AI and concerns about weaponization. And I'm thinking that in some way, those people that have faulty thinking, they're kind of like being robots. That's one area. So I'm not too sure if AI is different. The other is the point was that I was going to say that, well, given AI, we are still going to have the problems that we're going to have.
Yes.
However, it's manifested.
Yeah, and I'll run those two questions together. Okay, people are not robots. People have an ability to make decisions for themselves. We don't have robots that do that yet.
Right.
But we program robots, and we program people, although we don't program them as such, right? But people are given tools to live with, and the trouble is there's better education and worse education, and there are better students and worse students. But we're not robots in the sense that we don't have a program we're stuck with. Okay, we have the ability to make our own decisions and our own minds up. But how do we do that? And that's where philosophical counseling comes in, where it turns into teaching, where someone says, and I've got cases in my books that talk about this. Someone says, "Wow, that really helped what you told me, and how you took that apart, that problem, and showed me what might be possible. And I like this, and I don't like that. If that's okay with you." And I go, "Yeah, sure. Take what you need," right? Because what we're doing with philosophical counseling is also teaching people how to think about problems, to put tools in their toolboxes that they don't have in life for whatever reason. They didn't like education, they were poorly educated, or whatever. And it's really difficult to say people should act differently. They can't. A lot of people cannot imagine, they can't picture, they can't conceptualize a different way of being than what they are. And robots are like that. They cannot be any other way than what they are. But I don't agree that people are like robots. I
didn't say they're like robots.
Well, okay, all right.
But the way they do think sometimes certainly imitate one.
Yeah, we are programmable, absolutely. Right, Peter and Regina? We are programmable, but I think the key, Peter, what you just said is, and I'll reiterate it, we could change the program.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yes.
I hate to use the word programming on people. It's the same thing with propaganda. You can propagandize people, but they can still sit back in the evening after they turn the television off and say, "I don't agree with any of that was said, but I'll act like it so I don't get in trouble."
Well, trouble is not alien to us either, particularly. Karen, please go ahead. Nice to see you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm picking up the idea of AI, and I want to throw out an idea about AI. AI is material, and the brain is material. The mind is spiritual. And here's a particular little thought I had recently. I was thinking about Helen Keller and the story of how she learned the word for water. Now, I read that years ago as a child. I love to kind of reread and hear in her own words what that was like. But she was ecstatic when she learned this word for water. And I would claim that her understanding of water is something that no AI and no animal can do. And that is apprehend what something is. which is the basis for, according to Aristotle, and I don't know, maybe others, which is the basis for the immateriality of the soul. So, dogs, and they use words, and they learn words very mechanically, instrumentally, and so does AI. But only a human being, not a dog and not AI, can know what something is. And with that, I agree also, only a human being has free will. What do you say to all that?
Okay, well, I think that AI certainly can tell you what water is. They'll give you a whole paragraph explanation of what water is.
No. That's not the same thing. That's like a book. It's like a book telling you what something is. You made a very good point about the book is a material thing. The internet is like an electronic book with the millions and jillions of pages, but the internet doesn't have awareness. The internet doesn't know anything. The internet doesn't have consciousness, and neither does AI. AI does not know. It only produces lots of words based on the many, many, many little tidbits. That's my understanding of how computers work. They just have so many little tiny things, but they never, ever, ever are able to do the purely human thing, which is abstract and know something, what something is, which is an immaterial process. An immaterial, that's not even the word, I shouldn't use the word process there. It's an immaterial act.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. And there's a conversation in the AI, artificial intelligence field, which dealing with the question of what is consciousness. You have to define that if you say AI doesn't have it. Okay. AI, robots are not, we never have children robots. You never have baby robots. They don't grow up. They just get built large. Right off the bat, they're adults. And they have a whole bunch of information put into them. And the question is, are they conscious when they have all that information put in them? The answer is no, if that's all you've got. Okay.
Right. Right.
Okay. Now you're talking about this is a different topic that there's dealing with an AI is the whole concept of spirituality. And I try not to offend you. Okay. But there's been a real problem with translating philosophy when the philosophers in the ancient times said, philosophy is for the saving the soul or edification of the soul or whatever those common phrases are. And the problem is that the English word soul is religious, but the Greek word in which philosophy was written originally in Greek didn't talk about a soul. It wasn't talking religiously. It was talking about the mind. It was talking about the content of the brain, about who you are, which is the mind, right?
That's not offending me whatsoever. I understand philosophy, and I certainly understand, De Anima wasn't a spiritual work, Aristotle and all of that. I'm talking about philosophy, not spiritual writing.
Could I clarify something? If I'm going to not to add complication, but to get clarity, you're not in disagreement, either of you. But you used the word earlier, Karen, understanding, and that's the whole linchpin of Helen Keller's experience, because she was blind and deaf.
Yes.
Her caretaker, Anne Sullivan, who was the catalyst of this breakthrough, was pouring water on one hand, so Helen Keller had the sensation of water. And on the other hand, Anne Sullivan was tracing the letter W, and Helen Keller said that she suddenly had the understanding that the symbol that was being traced on one palm of her hand was the name of the sensation on the other hand. And that did not come from the external world, and it didn't come from anything material. It came from what Descartes would have said is the faculty of the mind that we call understanding, and being a normal child in every other respect. Anne Sullivan immediately was driven crazy because Helen Keller wanted then to know the names of everything she could touch, because she realized from the particular, she made the leap to the universal, understood that everything had a name. If she could touch it, it must have a name. And that's how she acquired language. It's almost miraculous miraculous. I'm not saying miraculous in the, in the biblical sense, but it's an extraordinary demonstration of the capacity of human understanding, is it not? When even in a sensory deprived situation, that one could still activate one's ability to learn and master language. It's an extraordinary thing. And you're right, AI cannot do that, even though intellectual property is technically not material. Okay, hardware is material. Software, the status of software is in limbo. You could say that it's really not material, it's intellectual property, whatever that means.
That's an entirely different thing than spiritual. I understand the difference between software and hardware. I get that quite entirely, but being spiritual is something entirely different from both.
Well,
it's kind of like, the difference between energy, like force fields and energy and all these sorts of things. Those are still material things, and so is software. It's not a spiritual thing. It's just philosophically trying to keep that.
But it's not material. But anyway, we won't need to argue about that, because we're back to, I think, what Peter is talking about from the beginning, this idea of the mind and human consciousness, which none of us can define, but there's also self-awareness, and AI doesn't have that. It's only simulating that.
Yes,
Not yet. It's simulating.
It can't.
Yeah, I was going to add to that, Lou, that not yet. The people who are working in the field are saying, give us a few more years. I wouldn't want to guess how many years, but that's what they're aiming for, is consciousness, where robots will be just like human beings. But the funny thing is that the people who are working in the field of AI don't know why AI is working as it is right now. So how are they going to get to consciousness? I have no idea.
I don't know either, Peter, but they're starting to date robots in Japan. I mean, they're ahead of this curve, and they're going to have robots now, caretaker robots, and robot dating is going to happen. So all bets are off, all right?
Yeah.
Peter, I want to thank you very much for this. It's been really interesting, engaging. You've done great work, and you're still doing it, and we're very thankful to you for appearing as our guest today. Much obliged.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Lou, and I appreciate all the questions, and I appreciate everyone who tuned in to witness my struggle with answering your questions. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. We'll look forward to your next books. Keep up the great work, and make sure always to give your wife credit, so would she not bring her on the show. Thanks, everybody. It's great to see you. We may be off for the summer, okay? But you'll get the announcement about our next Agora, all right? Thanks again, Peter. Take good care, everyone. Be well. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the summer. Bye for now.
Bye.